have we borrowed ourselves to death? Are we headed for a 2-decade-long period of economic hell like Japan, which is also borrowing up the wazoo? Our guest today, John Mauldin, you've been very vocal about saying that we are really headed down a dangerous course, long-term, not near-term, but long-term with the borrowing. Lay that out for us.
Well, the real problem is that when you take all the mathematical equations and stuff, savings equals investments. So when the government is dis-saving, that means you and me and businesses and foreigners and the kindness of strangers have to make up so that we can have something for investment. Because you've got to have investments into private companies. That's where the jobs come from.
And isn't that sort of what the government is trying to do by borrowing all this money and spending it in the
economy?
In the
short term, government spending will increase GDP, but in the long term, it has zero multiplier effect. So what we need is private industry investing, and that's where the real jobs and growth comes from. So that's when the Keynesians come in and argue that, well, we need some stimulus to make up for the drop of consumption, they're correct. But it doesn't help long term. And long term, if you keep running trillion-dollar deficits, or as more realistic assessments, it goes back up to $2 trillion by the end of this decade, you suck all of the air out of the room. That's why Japan has had no job creation for 20 years. Their nominal GDP is where it was 17 years ago. And we run the same danger. What we've got to do is to get the deficit down and put incentives in for private businesses to create jobs.
So I got to ask whether we're going to become Japan, because it sounds horrible, but first, so when is this going to kill us? I mean, we got a lot of debt now, but Japan had a lot of debt 15 years ago.
Japan had 15% savings rates, and they sucked all the savings into the government system. We don't have 15% savings rate. Now we're going to go up to 7 or 8, but we don't want all of that money going into government debt. The answer is we're never going to get to that $2 trillion deficit because we can't. It's just too big. The markets won't fund it. And so sometime, and I don't know when, a year, 2 years, 3 years, if we don't show a credible plan to get back to manageable debts, the market's just going to jerk our chain. Rates go up. We have another crisis. If we haven't fixed our too big to fail banks, we'll have banks too big to fail again. And we'll be forced to act rationally. We're not going to hyperinflate. Gold's not going to 50,000. But we could have a problem. Now, if on the other hand, we stand up and say, this is too much debt. This is too much deficit. We're going to have a credible path and pull a number out of the air. 150 billion a year we're going to reduce the deficit by for the next 5 years. And we're either going to reduce it by growing or by increasing taxes if you want to, or by actually cutting spending, something that is inconceivable. But we have to do that, otherwise the bond market will just take us by the throat and drag us off.
You think we will be forced into a crisis decision here? It's not something that's just going to be the elephant in the room for 15 years.
No, you can't fund $15 trillion in the next 8 or 9 years. There's just not out there. I mean, you can't find more than 100% of GDP. The world's going to give us about $300 billion a year. That's what they're doing now, because that's what we're buying of their stuff, and they turn around and conveniently put it into our debt. But to find another 1.2 trillion, 1.3 trillion every year, it's not there.
Thank you, John.